The sound of hooves pounded against the dry earth, a relentless rhythm echoing across the fading daylight. In the flickering shadows of the vast plains, a group of raiders, cloaked in dust and desperation, urged their horses on. They had been running for days, driven by a hunger that gnawed at their insides, a hunger that whispered promises of treasure. Somewhere in the distance loomed a forgotten barn, its silhouette barely discernible against the darkening sky. The raiders exchanged glances, measuring each other. The lead rider, a broad-shouldered man named Cade, lifted his chin. He had the look of a man who once wore fear like a second skin but had long since cast it aside. He squinted toward the barn, the glint of mischief reflected in his eyes. "Looks like it's abandoned," he said, voice low and gritty. The shrill whinny of a horse cut through the air, its sound mingling with the hiss of the wind. A chill ran through the ranks of the raiders. They had heard tales of traps laid for unsuspecting intruders, of men lured by false promises. But hunger had a way of blinding men to danger. Called Jonah, the youngest of the group, his voice cracking with excitement. His eyes sparkled with the thrill of adventure, the flicker of hope ignited by the idea of finding anything worth taking. Cade nodded reluctantly, leading the way toward the dilapidated structure. Each step felt heavier than the last, the barn looming larger and more foreboding with every passing moment. The wooden beams creaked like weary old bones and the paint had peeled away, revealing splintered wood underneath. It looked like a ghost of its former self, a relic of a time long forgotten. As they dismounted, the ground swallowed their footsteps, muffling the sound. They slipped inside, the stale air wrapping around them like a shroud. Shadows danced across the walls, flickering in the dim light as their eyes adjusted. Empty hay bales lay scattered around, brittle and crumbling, a sign that no one had tended to this place for years. Cade's heart raced, adrenaline flooding his veins. He felt the weight of anticipation, the thrill of possibility. "Split up," he ordered, his voice firm. "Search every corner." Every man nodded, the tension growing palpable. As they fanned out, Cade wandered deeper into the barn, the whispers of his comrades fading into the background. He ran his fingers along the rough wooden beams, feeling the history embedded in the fiber of the barn itself. A sense of unease crept in, a nagging voice in the back of his mind. But the thought of wealth drowned it out. He stumbled upon an old tool bench covered in dust. Curiosity flickered in his mind, along with the temptation to uncover hidden treasures. As he leaned closer, inspecting the tools, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the barn, followed by shouts. His heart sank. He yelled, adrenaline flooding every word, but there was no answer. Panic clawed at his throat as he raced back. He reached the entrance just in time to see Jonah standing frozen, eyes wide, mouth agape. It was as though the boy had stepped into a nightmare. A trapdoor hidden beneath a rusted metal grate had sprung open. From the darkness below, shrouded figures surged up, men clad in black, their faces obscured, eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. The raiders had unwittingly stepped into a carefully laid trap designed for the desperate, the hungry, their kind. Cade's breath quickened as he took in the scene. Too late, he understood the hidden nature of the barn. It was a facade, a bait meant to lure men like them. He screamed, but before he could move, a heavy presence pressed down upon them, surrounding them, cutting off any chance of escape. Jonah stumbled backward, his panic palpable. One of the cloaked figures lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar. Fear transformed the boy's youthful face into a mask of terror. The sound of tearing fabric and cracking bone filled the air. Cade's instincts kicked in, he charged forward. But it was chaos. Another raider, Merc, swung a makeshift weapon, a spade, against one of their attackers. It struck true, a sickening thud reverberating through the barn, but it only slowed down their assailants. 3 more emerged from the shadows, each one trained, fueled by the thrill of the hunt. The air thickened with tension, heavy with the metallic scent of fear and the palpable taste of desperation. In moments like this, survival instincts take hold. Cade fought hard, his fists finding purchase upon the attacker's flesh. His heart pounded as he felt the adrenaline surge through him like a tempest. They were outnumbered and undeniably cornered, but he refused to bow down to fear. With every punch, every kick, he felt the weight of his fellow raiders behind him. They were all brothers in this fight, all willing to scrap for survival. But it was not enough. As the raiders clashed against their adversaries, realization struck Cade like a dagger to the heart. This barn, this supposed treasure trove, was nothing more than a hungry predator lying in wait. Outside, nature spun on, oblivious to their plight, a cruel joke of fate. Jonah's screams punched through the air, a haunting symphony of despair. The remaining raiders rallied around him, but hope slipped further away with every moment. In the tumult, a knife gleamed, striking under the dim light, wedging its way into Merrick's side, an agonizing gasp escaping his lips as he crumpled to the floor. Cade felt the ground beneath him shift as he backed into a corner, desperation boiling through him. He suddenly caught a glimpse of the trapdoor, the very heart of their doom. They had walked into a death sentence, and the grim reality was crashing down like a tidal wave. With a roar, he leaped forward, the instinct to protect overwhelming every rational thought. He elbowed past the chaos, aiming straight for Jonah, forcing his way through the melee. They needed to get out, needed to regroup, but they were entangled in the mess, struggling against whatever fate had woven around them. Just as another attacker lunged at him, Cade snatched a rusty hoe hanging from a nearby hook, swinging it in desperation and narrowly avoiding disaster. The metal whistled through the air, connecting with an assailant and sending him crashing back into the shadows. It lit a spark of hope, igniting the remnants of his confidence. Cade rallied his men, shouting commands, weaving through bodies, battling the tide of steel and sweat. "We can't give up." But with each cry, his voice grew strained, and he realized the odds were stacked higher than he could have imagined. Through the haze of fear, however, he caught sight of something gleaming at the edge of his vision. A trapdoor swinging open, revealing the abyss below. Darkness writhed like a living thing. A deep sense of dread wrapped around him like a noose, tightening as he recognized that standing still was not an option. He yelled, eyes wide, voice hoarse. But the path to freedom was riddled with chaos, and retreating seemed impossible. But they moved like shadows in agony, each blow raining down like the drumbeat of impending doom. Merrick struggled to his feet, injured but not defeated, his relentless spirit shining through the pain. Cade admired the determination etched into his face, even as his blood painted the ground beneath them. As Cade turned back to the trapdoor, the gleaming silver knife found its mark again, burying itself deep into Merrick's side. This time he went down, a final gasp escaping his lips as he fell limp to the floor. Horror washed over Cade, a bitter taste of regret filling the back of his throat. That was it. Merrick's fall was the nail in the coffin, the moment that shattered any hope left in their hearts. In that breath of despair, he felt the tide turn against them. Cade's world collapsed into chaos. Life flickered, precious and fleeting, as he fought to hold on to what little strength remained. The raiders charged, terror emboldened by rage, trying to reclaim a shred of dignity in the face of defeat. And just when it seemed that fate had closed its door on them forever, an echoing blast shattered the air. It rang through the chaos, a thunderous roar that stunned both the attackers and the trapped. Amidst the disarray, a flash of rage surged through Cade's heart. He could still escape if they clawed out of this pitiful situation. It was either life or the abyss, and something primal surged within him. Glancing back, he rallied every ounce of strength left in his bones. He screamed, surging toward the entrance. He felt the warmth of blood and sweat, the metallic scent of life mingling with the acrid smell of fear. Beckoning to Jonah, Cade forged ahead, pulling the boy close. Like a coiled spring, they dashed toward the door, wrestling against the crowd of adversaries, rallying for freedom. Chaos continued to swirl, bodies colliding, desperation clawing at their backs. With a fierce kick, Cade threw open the door, tumbling into the cool night air. The stars shone down on him, glistening beacons against the darkened sky. He couldn't believe they had made it, but his heart sank when he turned, realizing Jonah was still back inside, trapped in the chaos. He screamed, his voice cracking under the weight of urgency. And there it was, amid the melee, a flash of movement. The boy was fighting for his life. Cade didn't hesitate. He tore back toward the barn. He bellowed, battling his way through the shadows, laughter echoing around him. But the moment he entered, he was met with the weight of despair closing in once more. In the darkness, he fought, pushing past not just for Jonah but for Merk, for every fallen brother who had stood at his side. Visibility was limited, chaos wrapped around him like a cloak, but he wouldn't abandon his men, not again. A hand grasped his arm, pulling him close, whispering fierce words of resolve. It was Merk, somehow standing and forcing their bond tightly like steel. Together they tackled the throng, swiftly shifting toward the breaking dawn, their escape clawing closer with each move. Finally, Cade saw Jonah emerge, fatigue painted across his young face, but determination glimmered in his once-wide eyes. They moved as one, a fierce formation pushing past their adversaries, barreling through the darkness. As they crossed outside into the brilliant dawn, the first rays of sunlight ignited the horizon, casting the shadows behind them. Despite the chaos that had ensued, they managed to escape, hearts still pounding, the barn now a forgotten memory entwined with lingering fear. They rode hard, hearts racing, spirits shaking but alive, the echoes of the past fading behind them. There would be no need for glories. The battle survived, flared within them as a primal bond. Days later, as the sun dipped below the horizon once more, Cade settled before a fire, the flickering flame reflecting hope on the hardened ground. He glanced toward Jonah, who stared into the distance, still lost in the aftermath. Life continued, but they bore scars. The barn, once a promise of wealth, had turned into a sinister trap, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows, waiting for the desperate. Amid the embers of the past, a brotherhood sparked anew, bound by survival, drawn closer by chaos. In the silence of the night, Cade understood the truth. Desperation held its own dangers, but it also forged indomitable spirits. That day changed everything, but it also ignited a fire within them, one that would light the path forward, no matter the shadows that lay ahead. The stillness of the air hung heavy, like the calm before a storm, broken only by the sound of hooves thundering across the dry earth. Dust kicked up in clouds behind a group of raiders, their eyes shining with anticipation. They had spent days riding hard, hungry for a whispered tale of a barn on the outskirts of a forgotten town, rumored to be a treasure trove filled with supplies and hidden riches. Cade, the leader of the ragtag band, pulled his horse to a stop. They exchanged nervous glances, glimmers of hope flickering in their weary eyes. "This is it," he said, his voice low but confident. They huddled together for a moment, the air thickening with excitement as they debated their next move. Jonah, the youngest of the group, practically bounced in his saddle. What if there are weapons? He could hardly contain his eagerness, his youthful optimism palpable. Cade clenched his jaw. He had seen too many brave men lose everything because of longing like this. "Stay alert. If it looks too good to be true, it probably is," he warned, but the thrill of adventure pulsed in him as well. The barn stood like a silhouette against the burning horizon, weathered, broken, but oh so inviting. They approached cautiously, dismounting with barely a sound. The sun sank, casting long shadows on the ground as they stepped inside. The barn creaked ominously, the smell of stale hay and damp wood filling their lungs. A quick glance revealed empty stalls, cobwebs hanging like veils in the corners, and scattered remnants of a long-abandoned farm life. Cade's heart raced. "Split up," he commanded, trying to maintain control over the rising excitement. As they spread out, the dim light made everything feel unreal, like stepping into a dream. The dust motes caught the last rays of sunlight filtering through cracks in the walls, swirling like spirits of the past. Cade moved deeper into the barn, driven by curiosity. He rifled through some old crates, nothing but broken tools and rotten grain. Frustration simmered beneath his skin. Then suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back. Cade's instincts kicked in. Panic laced his voice as he rushed to the source of the noise. When he rounded the corner, a horrifying sight met him. Jonah was standing frozen, eyes wide, staring at what lay before him. It wasn't treasure, it was a hidden door. The trapdoor had swung open, revealing a dark abyss below. From that darkness surged a group of figures, cloaked and menacing, their faces obscured, eyes glinting with a fierce hunger. Cade's blood turned to ice. A trap. This whole barn had been a lure, a wicked snare for the desperate. His mind raced. He could feel hope slipping through his fingers like sand. He shouted, fear and adrenaline propelling him forward, but it was too late. The cloaked figures swarmed, each one moving with a calculated grace that sent chills down his spine. Jonah's scream cut through the air, a sound of raw terror, and Cade's heart wrenched. He had promised to protect these men, to safeguard their lives, and now they were caught in the spider's web. Merk, another raider, swung his makeshift club, striking one of the attackers squarely. The force caused his opponent to stumble, but it barely made a dent in the ensuing chaos. Cade pushed through the whirlpool of limbs, adrenaline surging. He had fought before, scraped by with bruises and broken bones, but the violence felt more sinister, darkly orchestrated like a horror movie unfolding around him. The noise was deafening: shouts, grunts, the thuds of bodies meeting flesh. He pushed his way to Jonah and Merk, who were frantically fighting to break free. But Cade could feel the surrounding threat closing in like a vice, choking the air out of him. He shouted, searching for any escape. The barn felt alive, its wooden ribs quaking under the pressure of looming despair. Every instinct in Cade screamed for survival, and he wouldn't let fear swallow them whole. He caught a glimpse of a wooden beam overhead, thick and sturdy. In one desperate moment, he leaped, grabbing hold of it, swinging himself up just as another attacker lunged at him. Cade felt the rush of adrenaline, a fierce determination blazing within. He swung that beam down with all his strength, crashing it into the menacing figures below. Chaos reigned as they scattered, and for a fleeting moment, hope flickered. Cade yelled to Merk and Jonah, but the trap was tightening again. They fought their way through, hearts hammering, gasping for air. Cade shot a glance at Merk, but the look in his eyes said it all. They were losing ground. Suddenly, a figure flanked Merk, unseen until it was too late. The glint of a knife sliced through the air, plunging deep into Merk's side. Cade's heart dropped. He watched in horror as Merk staggered back, the life draining from his face like a candle flickering out. Cade screamed, desperation fueling his voice. He moved instinctively, rushing to his friend, but hesitation gnawed at him. There was a whirlwind of hell around them, the other raiders, the attackers, the looming trapdoor that still lay beneath. Merk grunted, strength fading. Cade felt the weight of hopelessness crash over him, but he wouldn't back down. He grabbed Merk by the shoulder, trying to steady him. "We can hold them off." But as he spoke, another figure lunged forward, grabbing Merk and yanking him into the shadows. Cade's heart shattered as he saw his friend vanish. Panic clawed at his insides. Cade yelled, dragging Jonah along with him as they fought to break through the chaos. They stumbled back toward the entrance, desperately pushing against the tide of fear that threatened to engulf them both. Outside, the night air was shockingly cold, refreshing against their sweat-soaked faces. But before they could fully escape, one of the attackers barreled into Cade, slamming him into the ground. Pain exploded through him, the grit of the dirt muffling his breath. Jonah screamed, rising to pull Cade back, but the attacker was relentless. Cade wrestled against the figure, fury igniting within him like a wildfire. He yelled to Jonah, trying to shake off the hold. He could hear the chaos inside the barn continuing to unfold, a sickening reminder of how close they were to complete devastation. Just as Cade pushed himself to his feet, he caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows by the trapdoor, more figures emerging. They hadn't just lured them into a trap, they were waiting for reinforcements. His heart sank into his stomach. With that realization hanging in the air, Cade and Jonah bolted for the horses, adrenaline propelling them forward. Just as Cade leapt onto his mount, he heard more shouts and the thudding of approaching hoofbeats from the other side of the barn. But they had to escape. They couldn't let fear anchor them down. Cade grabbed the reins and urged his horse forward, feeling the rush of freedom pulse through him. They darted into the night, leaving behind the chaos and despair that had threatened to swallow them. But the shadows of what had just happened clung to them, heavy and suffocating. Days passed, but the haunting memories lingered. Cade found himself sitting around a flickering campfire with Jonah, their small group now down by one. They had buried Merk in the woods, marking the spot with a simple stone. The grief wrapped around Cade like a shroud, a constant reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. Jonah asked quietly, almost afraid to break the silence. Cade sighed, his heart still reeling. "We wanted to believe," he replied, the truth a bitter pill to swallow. "Desperation makes fools of us all. We thought it was empty, something to reclaim our hope." Jonah nodded, deep in thought. The silence enveloped them again, but it was a different silence, one forged from understanding, healing, and newfound resolve. All the shimmering possibilities of treasure faded into darkness, replaced by the reality of their risks. But with those risks came lessons, painful yet powerful. They had fought together, survived against the odds. The bond they shared remained unbreakable, forged in the fires of desperation and survival. Cade looked at Jonah, seeing not just a boy, but a steadfast companion, a brother. Cade wrapped an arm around him. "We'll move on," he declared, a sense of purpose igniting within him. "We will remember Merk and learn from our mistakes." As the fire crackled, creating silvery sparks dancing against the night sky, Cade felt a renewed sense of hope kindling within them. The pain of loss weighed heavy, but it also propelled them forward. They were stronger, wiser, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The road was uncertain, but as long as they were together, they would stand against the shadows. After all, they had survived a trap, and there is no greater treasure than that. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the desolate landscape. A group of raiders, weary from days of searching, pulled their horses to a halt at the edge of a rustic barn. The building stood like a forgotten sentinel on the horizon, cloaked in dust and memories. It looked abandoned, empty, but an irresistible impulse drew them in. Cade, the leader with a rugged face and eyes that had seen far too much, felt a thrill run down his spine. Jonah, the youngest of the group, shifted nervously in his saddle, barely able to contain his excitement. His wide eyes scanned the barn, the hope of riches glimmering in his gaze. "It has to be," Cade replied, squinting at the structure. "They say it's filled with supplies, food, weapons, even gold." The other raiders murmured their agreement. Hope hung thick in the air, but so did unease. They had heard whispers of traps set for fools chasing after illusions. Cade waved off the feeling, pushing it deep into the corners of his mind. As they dismounted, the sun dipped further below the horizon, the cool evening air wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. But the barn loomed ominously, its wooden boards creaking in the early twilight. Cade couldn't ignore the prickling sensation at the back of his neck, a warning of what lay ahead. "Let's go inside," he ordered, keeping his voice steady. The others followed, but Cade noticed the nervous glances exchanged among the group. They stepped cautiously into the barn, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that coated the floor. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the scent of hay long past its prime. The barn itself seemed alive, every creak and groan echoing in the silence. Shadows danced on the walls, twisting like phantoms lurking just out of sight. Jonah wandered off, his eyes shining with excitement. He shouted, his innocent enthusiasm infectious, even in the face of danger. Cade barked, the weariness in his voice betraying his deeper thoughts. The group fanned out, searching through the remnants of an abandoned life. As they moved through the barn, a sense of foreboding settled over Cade. He could feel the weight of something dark creeping in around them. Moments of searching turned into hours, but hope quickly dwindled. Splintered furniture and dusty tools lay scattered everywhere, mere echoes of whatever had come before. It was nothing but forgotten memories trapped within rotting wood. "Maybe this was a dead end," Merk, one of the older raiders, muttered, disappointment heavy in his voice. But Cade wasn't ready to give up. He ventured deeper into the barn, past mounds of dry hay and stacks of broken crates. He spotted a faint glimmer in the dim light, a rusted chest partly buried in debris. His heart raced again. This could be it. He called, rushing toward it. He brushed away the debris, exposing the chest more fully. As he unlocked it with shaky hands, the clamor of excitement quickened in his chest. The chest creaked open, revealing nothing but dust. Cade felt his heart sink, disappointment washing over him like a wave. Just as he turned to call out to the others, a loud crash echoed from the back of the barn. "Jonah!" Cade shouted. He dashed toward the noise, dread pooling in his stomach. When Cade reached the source, he froze. Jonah stood, mouth agape, eyes wide with terror. A hidden trapdoor lay open beneath them, revealing a dark abyss. Figures emerged from the shadows, men clad in black, their eyes gleaming like wolves as they ascended. Cade's blood ran cold. The barn wasn't a treasure trove, it was a snare. Panic surged through him. He yelled, heart pounding. But the words barely escaped his lips when the attackers charged at them, snarling beasts that had been waiting in the shadows. The air crackled with chaos as raiders fought for their lives. Cade's body moved on instinct. He lunged for Jonah, pulling him close. Merc stood his ground, swinging a heavy tool in his hands, striking one of the attackers with a sickening crunch. But they were outnumbered, desperation clawing at them as they fought back. The attackers moved with brutal efficiency, driven by a hunger that filled the air. Cade shouted fear, fueling his fury as he grappled with an adversary, swinging wildly. The fight bubbled around him, bodies colliding, the sound of chaos rumbling like thunder. He heard Merc scream. Cade turned, witnessing Merc caught off guard as another attacker plunged a blade into his side. The sight sent a jolt of ice through him. He staggered backward, grief and rage boiling together as he saw his friend fall. Cade bellowed, fighting to maintain control of the fraying situation. His breath came in ragged gasps as he shoved past bodies, wrestling into the throng. Jonah struggled near him, fear etched on his face. Just then, Jonah was yanked away, pulled into the swirling chaos. Cade shouted, the world around him blurring. He fought harder, desperation coursing through his veins. He had to get to Jonah, he had to save them both. But every move forward seemed to draw him backward, despair closing in like a vice. Shadows moved around him, the attackers closing in, a reminder of their predicaments. A trapdoor that had sprung open, a dance with danger that spiraled into chaos. Cade lunged, grabbing the neck of another attacker, wresting him backward. The man fell but was quickly replaced by another. The encroaching darkness pressed in, and Cade fought harder, driven by instincts honed through hard days of survival. Cade roared, swinging a heavy wooden beam connecting solidly with an attacker's head. The figure crumpled to the ground, but the opening was small and fleeting. Darkness loomed just beyond, but they needed to escape to find their way back to safety. Cade cried, turning to Jonah, but in that instant his heart dropped. Another attacker barreled toward them, and Cade felt the world slow. With a sickening crunch, he heard the sound of Jonah's scream, a piercing wail that echoed in the barn's haunting walls. Cade howled. In the eye of chaos, he felt a surge of raw adrenaline, and he lunged forward, grabbing Jonah just as the boy fell. He hoisted him up, taking every ounce of strength he had left. Don't look back. With determination, they raced toward the exit, the trapdoor yawning behind them like the mouth of a beast. Yet fate refused to relent. Just as they reached the creaking entrance, another attacker dove forward, knocking Cade off balance. He staggered, clutching Jonah tightly. The air thickened with terror as the world around them shook, chaos tightening its grip. Cade fought like a man possessed. With every ounce of energy, he shoved Jonah forward, bursting through the door and into the tense night. But as he stumbled out, he felt a hot, sharp pain in his side, an agonizing reminder of the darkness still lurking behind him. He managed to shout, each word dragging through gritted teeth. Jonah ran ahead, the flickering moonlight guiding his steps. But as they mounted their horses, Cade glanced back, the chill of despair tightening its hold. He watched shadows slip away into the night, the outlines of their attackers keeping their distance. He urged his horse forward, racing into the unknown, a fresh wave of adrenaline pushing him on. They could hear the echo of chaos fading behind them, but the sting of loss hung in the air. Days turned to weeks as they traveled, making camp in desolate places, the memories of that night still haunting them. The bond among the remaining raiders deepened, but the loss of Merc weighed heavily on Cade. Each quiet moment draped with shadows could not fade the stark reality of their sacrifice. Jonah asked one night, the fire crackling as he fought against the darkness that hung heavy in the air. Cade looked at him, his heart heavy with regret. Desperation can make fools of the smartest men. With every passing moment, the weight of their encounter hung over them. But the fire still burned brightly, a reminder of life, survival, and friendship. Together they forged a bond, solidified in grief but tempered with resilience. As they sat overlooking the horizon, watching the sun dip below the line, Cade resolved to carry Merc's memory with him. They had lost something, but they also gained wisdom, an understanding of the thin line they walked between hope and despair. With silence surrounding them, Cade glanced at Jonah, seeing not just a friend but a partner in this life, even as shadows danced in the fading light. They had survived the trap. They wouldn't allow the darkness to define them. As dawn broke over the horizon, hues of orange and pink illuminating the sky, Cade took a deep breath. They would ride forward, embracing whatever came next. Trusting in each other and holding tightly to the lessons learned, they set their sights ahead. They may have entered that barn seeking treasure, but along the way they discovered something far greater, the strength that binds them, the courage to face the unknown, and the unbreakable bond of brotherhood forged in the fires of hardship. With that resilience, they would survive, and together they would reclaim their lives, step by unyielding step. A thin veil of dust hung in the air, illuminated by the fading light of the setting sun. A group of raiders, hardened by a life of struggle, tightened their grips on the reins of their horses as they rode towards a dilapidated barn. It stood lonely on the horizon, a relic of better days, its weathered wood creaking like an old man's bones. Cade, the leader, a tall, muscular man with a deep scar running down the side of his face, felt the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "This is it, boys," he said, his voice low but bursting with anticipation. "This barn has to be holding something." Jonah, the youngest of the group, was practically bouncing in his saddle. "What if we find weapons?" His wide eyes sparkled with the thrill of the chase. Merk, an older, more cautious raider, interjected, "We can't afford to be careless." Cade dismissed Merk's caution with a wave of his hand. The whispers of danger lurked in his mind, but the lure of possible riches drowned out the warnings. They dismounted and stepped toward the barn, the earthy ground crunching beneath their boots. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of rotting hay and neglect. Shadows played tricks on their minds. Each creak of the wooden beams reminded them that they were not alone. Cade led the way deeper into the darkness, every shadow an echo of forgotten tales. "Search for anything valuable," he commanded, though his heart raced with unease. Each raider scattered, their footsteps soft and cautious. Cade moved through the barn's remnants, peeling back the layers of dust covering old crates and equipment. The light that trickled in painted eerie patterns on the floor. Moments turned into minutes, and the sense of excitement began to fade, replaced by disheartenment. He called out, frustration rising like bile in his throat. Just as he turned to regroup, a sudden crash echoed from the far corner of the barn, breaking the worn silence. "Guys!" Jonah's voice cut through the stillness, trembling with panic. Cade rushed toward the sound, dread filling him as he charged past broken tools and forgotten memories. When he arrived, he found Jonah frozen, a mix of terror and awe on his face. Before them lay a trapdoor, its surface covered in dust, but the sound of movement came from below, a thumping that made Cade's heart race. He shouted, stepping forward just as the trapdoor swung open. A swarm of figuresmen clad in black appeared, emerging from the dark, their eyes glinting fiercely like wolves hungry for prey. Panic surged through Cade. He yelled, the command bursting forth like a bullet, but it was too late. The attackers lunged, their figures blurring together in chaotic speed, a lethal dance that turned the barn into a nightmarish whirlwind. Cade felt his heart pounding furiously in his chest as he dove toward Jonah. He shouted, yanking the boy away from the trapdoor as a nearby raider swung a heavy tool at one of the attackers, striking true. The force caused the man to stumble, but did little to halt the surge of invaders. Suddenly, the weight of their surrounding realities pressed down like a storm, fear giving birth to a primal instinct for survival. Cade yelled, his voice breaking through the chaos that enveloped them. Merk faced off against an attacker, swinging fiercely, sweat and blood mingling in the chaos. Cade felt the surge of something deeper, a visceral protective instinct for his clan. They were like brothers, forged together in hardship, and he wouldn't let them fall apart now. But in a flash, the world narrowed. Cade saw Merk struggle, a glint of metal flashing too close. Cade roared, catching sight of a knife plunging into Merk's side. The horror struck him like a bolt of lightning, time slowing as Merk's body fell limp. Cade screamed, pushing forward as the remaining men surged around him. They were trapped. The walls closed in like a snake, coiling tighter with every heartbeat. Jonah's scream shattered Cade's concentration. his companion yanked backward into the blurred frenzy of men fighting desperately for their lives. In that moment, everything shifted. The room became a cacophony of screams, metal clashing against wood, grunts echoing through the air. Cade spun, fear clawing at him, fury boiling up as he fought toward Jonah. If he lost him too, he didn't know how he would survive the darkness that clung to him. Cade shouted, lunging toward Jonah as another assailant turned toward the boy. Just as he reached him, the attacker struck, but Cade arrived in time, throwing himself into Jonah just as the blow landed. They tumbled to the floor, chaos swirling above them. Cade wrestled to regain control, shoving Jonah away from danger. With adrenaline pumping through his veins, Cade's instincts took over. He grabbed a nearby wooden beam, swinging it through the air with all his remaining strength, striking the assailant hard. The figure fell, momentarily stunned, but Cade knew they needed to move now. He yelled, yanking Jonah to his feet. Together they pushed against the throng, hearts pounding, limbs tangled in the chaos. But the attackers were relentless. They surged forward, blocking every exit, and with each moment, despair threatened to pull them under. Cade fought with everything he had, but as he swung again, a voice pierced through the din. One of the attackers shouted, charging at them with a gleam of triumph in his eyes. Cade could feel the tide turning against them, hopelessness creeping up his back as if the walls themselves were closing in. He urged Jonah, shoving him forward once more. They stumbled toward the door, the chilly air beckoning them outside, but the attackers were closing in. With one final surge of strength, Cade grasped Jonah's arm and flung him through the open doorway, praying that escape was possible. He followed, the fresh night air hitting him like a wave, a flicker of hope igniting fiercely within him. But just as they galloped away, Cade glanced back, heart pounding. He swung his club wildly, feeling the rush of survival propelling him forward. The dark barn faded behind them, but the haunting shadows still clung to their minds. Once far enough away, they pulled the horses to a halt and stumbled to the ground, gasping for breath. They were victorious, yes, but the toll of their escape was heavy. Jonah cried, his pale face stricken with fear. Cade took a deep breath, heart racing as he assessed their surroundings. They were secluded, hidden in the woods, but the realization of their loss crashed upon him like a wave. The barn, once a beacon of hope, now stood as a grim reminder of their desperation. Behind them lay Merk, the brother they could not save. As they made camp that night amidst the somber trees, Cade felt every profound loss weighing heavily on his heart. The darkness of grief hung thick in the air, threatening to choke him as he stared into the flickering fire. The shadows danced around him, mocking his desperation. Jonah whispered, eyes glassy and lost. Cade stared into the flames, memories swirling around him, each decision echoing like ghosts in his mind. "We wanted something better," he murmured, the weight of regret pressing down harder. Days turned into nights as they moved on, their journey marred by questions and guilt. Jonah often struggled, torment etched into his youthful face, but together they traveled on, clinging to one another as if the bond of brotherhood was the only thing that could keep them afloat amidst the rising tide of despair. Yet with each sunset, Cade uploaded his strength into Jonah, driving them forward. They rode through storms, across barren lands, seeking not treasure but solace. The lessons they carried were heavy, but each day brought a chance for reprieve, a chance to remember Merk with honor. Finally, one evening as the sun sunk low, they came to a valley bathed in golden light. It felt like home. With a mix of melancholy and relief, Cade realized they had grown through loss, through fear they had survived because they had each other. "Let's make camp here," Cade said, signaling for Jonah to dismount. Together they set up their simple shelter, the memory of the barn still fresh in their minds but now tempered with determination. As night fell, they sat by the fire, warmth seeping into their bones. Cade glanced at Jonah, whose eyes had lost some of their youthful shine but were now filled with resilience. Jonah asked quietly, his voice sincere. Cade thought for a moment, then replied, "Peace isn't found in treasures or victories." The flickering flames reflected in Jonah's gaze, illuminating the path ahead. As they sat in the silence, Cade felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by a sense of purpose. Each day ahead was an opportunity to remember Merk, to honor his strength and spirit. With the shadows of their experience growing lighter, Cade knew they would never forget that the barn would forever be etched in their hearts. It taught them about resilience, about the choices they made and the bonds forged in the crucible of hardship. As the stars blanketed the sky, Cade felt a warmth envelop him, a flicker of hope igniting once more. No longer about the riches they had sought, but about the strength to keep moving forward. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, hand in hand, ready to rise against whatever lay ahead. Tomorrow would be another chance, and this time they'd be ready. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the empty plains. A group of raiders approached a barn, worn and decrepit, standing alone like a relic from another time. Laughter mingled nervously with the wind, each rider anticipating the discovery of long-lost treasures hidden within. They had heard whispers of riches, supplies, perhaps even weapons stashed away, waiting for a band of brave souls to claim them. Cade, the rugged leader of the raiders, sat tall in the saddle, his eyes focused on the structure. He could almost taste the promise of wealth. "'Sis it, boys," he proclaimed, a thrill sparking in his chest. Jonah, the youngest of the group, shifted with excitement. His youthful exuberance mirrored Cade's enthusiasm. "What if we find something amazing?" He leaned forward, his eyes sparkling as he imagined the possibilities. "Or it could just be a pile of junk," Merrick, the older and more cautious raider, interjected. "We've got to watch our backs." Cade shrugged off Merrick's worry. They were desperate, hunger gnawed at them, and every man needed hope. "We'll be fine. Just stick together," he said, swinging down from his horse. The ground was dry and cracked beneath his boots, crunching softly as he stepped forward. As they moved into the barn, a wave of stale air rushed to greet them. Dust motes danced in the fading light, creating an almost magical aura. Cade pressed further inside, every creak of the wooden beams sounding like whispers from the past. Shadows flickered, causing him to squint as he scanned the depths of the barn. "Search for anything valuable," he commanded, urging his men to split up. Jonah and Merrick moved toward a row of empty stalls, their anticipation palpable. Cade wandered deeper, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and unease. He rifled through crates, tossing aside old tools and forgotten remnants. His fingers brushed against something cold, a rusted key. Maybe it would unlock a treasure, he thought, though it felt more like a relic of sorrow. Just as he pondered its significance, a loud crash erupted from the other side of the barn. "Guys!" Jonah's voice quaked in the thick air, reverberating in Cade's chest like a drum. Panic surged through him as he rushed toward the sound. When he reached Jonah, the boy stood frozen, eyes wide with terror. But it wasn't just fear. Something dreadful lay before them. A trapdoor creaked open in the floor, its edges worn and neglected. From beneath, shadows stirred and strange sounds echoed, deep and sinister. Cade shouted, but the words barely escaped before dark figures began to emerge, men clad in black, their intentions as murky as their hooded faces. Each step they took felt like a hammer blow against Cade's gut. Time slowed as horror washed over him. He bellowed, but the words were lost in the cacophony of colliding bodies and desperate shouts as the attackers surged forward like a tide. Jonah grabbed Cade, panic evident in his voice. Cade commanded, his voice firm even as his heart raced. He plunged into the chaos, instinct guiding him as he battled the encroaching figures. They fought, fists and weapons flying, but the attackers were relentless. Merrick swung a heavy tool, connecting with one of the intruders, who staggered back with a grunt. Cade caught a glimpse of Merrick's determined face, glowing with fury and fear. They had to escape, the odds were already against them. But just then the world felt like it was caving in. Cade turned to check on Jonah and felt his breath hitch. A wave of dread swept over him as he saw one of the attackers close in on the boy. "Jonah!" Cade screamed. He rushed forward, but it was too late. The shadow lunged, tackling Jonah to the ground. Cade dove into the fray, wrestling with everything within him, but the chaotic dance of battle felt almost unreal, like a nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. Cade roared, pushing and pulling, striking wildly as Jonah struggled beneath the weight of his attacker. The air was thick with desperation, every breath a fight for survival. Just then, Merrick was thrown back, stumbling violently into a stack of crates that toppled like dominoes. A sickening crunch echoed as one of the crates landed on Merrick's foot, forcing him to cry out in pain. Cade's heart twisted, fury igniting within him. With determination, Cade struck with ferocity, landing a blow that sent another attacker sprawling, but their numbers were overwhelming. Shadows loomed closer, growing thicker as panic clouded everything around him. He couldn't let them lose. It wasn't just a battle, it was their lives on the line. Push back. Cade shouted, though every word felt like a plea rather than a command. In the heart of chaos, he fought to grab Jonah, who now lay trembling and wide-eyed, the nightmare reflected in his face. Cade urged, grabbing Jonah's arm, pulling him toward the entrance. But just as they broke away, another figure lunged forward, grabbing at Cade. Merrick shouted, his voice strained but charged with anger. Merrick swung the heavy tool once more, catching the assailant. The force created a momentary distraction, giving Cade just enough time to propel Jonah forward through the door. But as Cade turned back, Merrick was caught in a fierce battle with two attackers. "Merrick!" Cade yelled, the words ripping from his throat. As the two men fought, Cade felt his chest clench in despair. He couldn't leave Merrick behind. Merrick had been with him through countless struggles. They were brothers forged in fire. Suddenly, a vicious blow landed on Merrick's side, knocking him to the ground. Cade's heart dropped as he realized the grave danger his friend was in. Merrick gasped, trying to push himself back up, but the attackers only increased their assault, shoving him down relentlessly. Cade roared, igniting his fury as he rushed toward Merrick. He blasted through the fray, prying one attacker away, throwing him aside with all his might. But the momentary relief shattered as he felt something stab into his side. Pain shot through him, burning like fire. Merrick shouted, though Cade felt his strength waning. Time blurred, desperation clawing at the edges of their resolve. They needed to move, needed to escape. Cade could scarcely breathe as he turned back, instinctively moving to grab Jonah's arm, pulling him away from the chaos even as Merrick lay in the shadows. With a final look at Merrick, who was struggling up against the tide of attackers, Cade felt guilt weave its way into his bones. But there was no time. They had to escape. The barn seemed to roar as they fought for freedom, a prison of desperation pressing in on them from all sides. Cade shoved Jonah ahead, and they barreled through the threshold, leaving behind the terrifying tapestry of chaos. Fresh air washed over them, but the weight of loss and fear clung to their backs like chains. Panting, they mounted their horses, hearts racing as they thundered away into the night, the darkness swallowing the barn whole. But as they rode, Cade could scarcely breathe, his thoughts racing. Merrick, whatever had happened to him, they had left him behind. Days turned into brutal nights on the run. They rode in a haunting silence, the sun's harsh rays settling over their tired bodies. Thoughts of the barn loomed heavy. Cade felt guilt carve itself into the very fabric of his being. The barn had promised gold and riches, but all it had delivered was pain and loss. Jonah murmured one evening around the campfire, his voice breaking the stifling silence. Cade ran a hand through his hair, its dampness echoing the weight on his heart. "Desperation blinds you," he said, his voice shaky. "We wanted hope, a chance to grasp something better." He paused, lost in thoughts of what had just happened. They spoke little in the days that followed, processing the reality of what they'd endured. Cade felt as though they carried the very echoes of their fallen brothers with them, the weight of loss pressing down as they traversed a desolate landscape. A few more days passed, hope replaced with grief. Every town they passed felt like a reminder of what they had lost. They struggled to find purpose, to fill the void left by Merrick. Cade became increasingly haunted, each flash of darkness reminding him of the choices laid before them that day. One night under a blanket of stars, Cade watched Jonah as he stared into the firelight, a flicker of determination igniting in the boy's eyes. Jonah asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Cade looked into the flames, the dance of hope lighting a corner of his heart. "Peace comes from facing what we've lost and learning from it," he replied cautiously. With each passing day, Cade tried to embody the lessons learned amidst the pain. They had faced a trap, one that had cost them dearly, but it also taught them about resilience, about bonds that weren't easily severed. Eventually, they came to a valley, golden field stretching into the distance, a stark contrast to what they had known. Cade felt a flicker of hope break through the shadows that had clouded his heart. "Let's make camp here," he declared, glancing at Jonah. The boy's demeanor shifted, a smile breaking through the sadness. The breath of fresh air filled Cade with a sense of renewal. That night they set up camp beneath a sprawling tree, the cool breeze whispering around them as if the world was reminding them to carry on. They sat together, watching the stars twinkle, the flames flickered like memories. Jonah asked quietly. Cade took a deep breath, feeling the weight of each moment enveloping him. "Merc was about survival. Every step we take is for him," he said firmly. "We can't let despair defeat us." As they spoke, the warmth of the fire illuminated their faces, bringing with it a flicker of hope. They had been broken, but they could rise again. Together, under the blanket of stars, Cade felt the scars on his heart begin to heal, each one a reminder of what could be lost but also what could be gained. They had faced the darkness and survived. Now they would honor their bond by living, by embracing the future ahead. And in that moment, Cade understood each breath was a chance to reclaim life. They had walked into a trap but emerged with strength and resilience. In shadows, there was always a flicker of light waiting to guide them home. The sun was just beginning to set when they spotted it, a barn in the distance, dilapidated and worn. It stood alone on the edge of the vast, empty fields, a silent witness to the passage of time. A group of tired raiders, desperate and hungry, exchanged glances, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. Was this their chance? Cade, the leader of the band, felt a stir of hope. They had traveled for days, searching for any sign of supplies, any hint of safety. "Let's check it out," he said, his voice steady though excitement crackled beneath the surface. Jonah, the youngest of the group, practically bounced in his saddle, a mix of youthful enthusiasm and nervous energy coursing through him. "Maybe there are weapons." He couldn't contain the thrill. "Or it could be a trap," Merc, the older and more experienced raider, warned, his eyes narrowing. "We need to be careful." Cade chuckled dismissively, but doubt flickered in his mind. Still, desperation begged them to keep moving. They dismounted and stepped toward the barn, the sound of their boots crunching against the dry earth echoing loudly in the stillness. Inside, a musty smell hit them like a wall. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by slivers of fading sunlight streaming through cracks in the wooden walls. Cade felt a chill run down his spine as shadows crept around them, making him second-guess their decision. "Spread out," he ordered, trying to sound confident. As they moved through the clutter, Cade's heart raced with a blend of excitement and unease. There were remnants of a life once lived, empty feed bags, broken tools, and rotting hay piled in corners. Yet the promise of discovery urged him onward. Minutes stretched into an eternity as Cade pulled apart the layers of neglect. Just as frustration threatened to consume him, a sudden crash from the back of the barn pierced the silence. "Guys!" Jonah's voice trembled, bursting with urgency. Cade's gut twisted as he rushed toward the sound. He rounded the corner and froze, the sight before him making his heart drop. Jonah stood near a trapdoor which slowly creaked open, revealing darkness that seemed to swallow the very light around it. Cade shouted, instinct kicking in. But the question turned to horror as shadowy figures surged from the depths below, cloaked in darkness, eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. "Run!" Cade screamed as he lunged forward, but his words were drowned out by panic. The barn transformed into a battleground. Raiders were pushed and pulled, and the air filled with screams and the clashing of bodies. Jonah was still frozen, and in an instant, Cade was at his side, grabbing the boy's arm with a fierce grip. Panic surged as figures swarmed, and Cade knew they couldn't fight them all. Merc swung a heavy tool with all his might, connecting solidly with one of the intruders, but the impact had little effect. The attackers were too numerous and too confident. They surged forward like a hurricane, an unstoppable force. Cade yelled, pulling Jonah into the fray as they fought their way toward the exit. But every glance back revealed more attackers closing in, their intent clear to overwhelm them. The chaos escalated. Cade could hear the shouts of his men, see their desperate faces as they struggled against the tide. Then he caught sight of Merc, still fighting valiantly but now surrounded on all sides. A primal fear gripped him. He shouted, trying to lunge back to help, but Jonah grabbed his sleeve, eyes wide with terror. Cade barked, forcing his way through the madness, but as he pushed deeper, he felt a sharp pain in his side, the unmistakable sting of a blade. He staggered, shock coursing through him as he lost his footing. Merrick's voice rang out, filled with anguish, but Cade couldn't process the words, drowning in the chaos around him. The room spun, chaos closing in like a vice. Fear, anger, and despair swirled like a storm in Cade's chest as he clawed his way back to the surface. Tendrils of darkness wrapped around his mind, desperate to pull him under. In that moment, instinct took over. He surged forward, pushing Jonah aside gently. He shouted, urgency fueling every word as he fought with everything left in him. Jonah stumbled toward the door, but Cade wasn't done. He threw himself into the crowd, swinging with everything he had, fueled by raw determination. Each connection felt like a heartbeat, pushing life through his veins. As the innocence of hope slipped away, Cade turned to see Merrick, bloodied and beaten, struggling against his attackers. Cade's heart raced, knowing he couldn't abandon him. Merrick's face twisted in pain, but there was a fire in his eyes. Merrick gasped, summoning his strength one last time. Cade hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment. But Cade couldn't let it end like this. He pushed forward, lost in a storm of chaos, grappling wildly until he managed to reach Merrick's side. But it was all too late. In a cruel twist of fate, Merrick stumbled, a desperate grasp for balance leading him directly into the path of an incoming attack. Cade felt the ground give way beneath him, his friend falling away, lost in the intensity of their fight. A sickening crunch echoed in Cade's ears, sending shockwaves of despair through him. Cade screamed, but his voice was lost in the roar of battle. Every breath felt like a betrayal. He watched as Merrick was dragged back into the shadowy depths, the darkness consuming his friend in a horrifying silence. Cade felt a weight settle in his chest, a painful realization that clenched tightly. They were losing everything. The thought propelled him forward. He couldn't let Merrick's sacrifice be in vain. "Jonah, we have to go," Cade shouted, dragging the young boy along as they fought their way to the exit. But the barn felt like a living nightmare, filled with despair, filled with loss. Finally, they reached the door, bursting into the cool night air. Breathless, Cade stumbled forward, his heart racing as he mounted his horse. Jonah lagged behind, fear etched across his face. Cade called, desperation creeping into his voice. But as they mounted their horses, Cade's gaze traveled back to the barn, shadows still swirling around it like a vortex. He felt sick, a part of him torn between hope and despair. They thundered away into the darkness, the world outside feeling unreal. The landscape blurred around him as grief settled into his bones. Merrick was gone, lost in that damned barn, and there was nothing he could do to bring him back. Days turned into weeks as they rode, haunted by the shadows of the past. Memories of the barn curled around them like thick fog, choking at their resolve. Cade felt guilt weigh heavy on his shoulders, a constant reminder of what they had lost. Jonah murmured one evening, the crackling fire illuminating their faces. Cade sighed, dragging a hand through his hair. Desperation blinds us. Silence enveloped them, the shadows of their memories almost tangible. They traveled on, but the weight of despair never left them. Each town a reminder of what they had lost, each passing day another marker of grief. Jonah struggled with the weight of it all. Cade could see the boy slip further and further into himself, the innocence of his youth stripped away by the brutal reality they faced. One night they camped under a blanket of stars, the fire burning brightly as if defying the darkness around them. Jonah sat quietly, staring into the flames, lost in thought. He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cade looked into the fire, memories igniting in his mind. "Peace isn't something we find outside ourselves. It's something we create," he replied, knowing deep down how hard it would be to truly believe those words. More days passed, the sun setting and rising like a relentless cycle of grief. Each day was a struggle against the shadows within, but they pressed on, two brothers forged anew in loss, searching for meaning as well as survival. As they pressed deeper into the unknown, they came across a valley bathed in golden light, lush with life. Cade felt a twinge of hope spark within him, igniting a sense of possibility. "Let's make camp here," he suggested, glancing at Jonah, who looked at the valley with hesitant eyes. Jonah asked, Cade replied, an echo of the words spoken so many days ago. But we can't allow fear to hold us hostage. As they set up camp, the cool breeze whispered through the grass, carrying an undertone of calm. That night they sat under a blanket of stars, letting the silence wash over them. They were still alive, and there was power in that. Jonah asked, his voice calm. Cade looked up at the stars, the universe expansive above them. Merc was about survival. Every step we take is in honor of him. We can't let darkness win. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night. And for the first time in days, Cade felt a flicker of relief, a warmth pulling back the shroud of despair. They were the ones left standing. They had seen the chaos and survived. Life would never be the same, but they could choose how to carry their memories with them: pride, love, and the strength to keep pushing forward. As dawn broke over the horizon, illuminating the valley with shimmering light, Cade turned to Jonah. We'll make it through this. They stood side by side, casting away the shadows that had wrapped around them for so long. It was a promise to rise, to honor their past, and to face whatever awaited them in the days to come. No longer would they be bound by regret or fear. They had entered a trap, yes, but they had emerged stronger, set upon a path toward healing and hope. And together, they would forge their new beginning one step at a time. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a crawl of shadows over a vast, dusty plain. A group of weary raiders approached a seemingly abandoned barn, its weathered wooden walls standing stubbornly against the twilight. Hope ignited within them, a flicker in their tired hearts suggesting this barn could be a treasure trove, a forgotten cache of supplies. Cade, the leader, a man with grit etched into his face and determination in his eyes, pulled his horse to a halt. This is it, boys, he said, scanning the structure. It has to be holding something, supplies. Jonah, the youngest of the raiders, practically bounced in his saddle. What if we find weapons or food? His excitement spilled over, lighting up his youthful features. Merc, the veteran of the group, tightened his grip on the reins, his brow furrowing with concern. Or it could be a trap. You know how these things go. Cade brushed off Merc's warning. They had come too far, faced too many hardships to turn back now. This could be our last chance. The raiders dismounted, the crunch of dry earth beneath their boots punctuating the cool, stagnant air. Entering the barn, Cade felt an eerie stillness settle over them. Dust motes swirled in the slicing beams of light peeking through gaps in the wood. Shadows danced, and the barn creaked like an old man warning them to leave. Spread out, Cade ordered, his tone authoritative as he moved further inside. Jonah and Merc followed, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust covering the floor. As Cade rifled through remnants of neglect-old tools, rusted machinery bent by time, he felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. What if this place was the answer to their desperate quest? Then, from the back of the barn, a sudden crash jolted him. Guys, Jonah shouted, his voice tinged with shock. Cade's heart skipped. The sharp cut of fear twisted in his stomach. Whatever was happening could change everything. Cade dashed toward the sound, adrenaline propelling him forward. He rounded the corner and froze. Jonah stood with wide eyes, mouth agape at a trapdoor creaking ominously before them. From the blackness below came echoes of movement, rustling, shifting, discreet but threatening. Cade shouted, a shout of warning torn from the pit of his gut, but the moment the words left his lips, the trapdoor burst open. Figures cloaked in black surged upward, their faces obscured, eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. Time slowed. Cade felt his breath hitch. Alarm bells rang inside his head. He yelled, panic igniting the air around them. But it was too late. The attackers emerged, a whirlwind of chaos and violence, the barn transforming into a battleground. Jonah's scream pierced through the turmoil, and Cade lunged for him, grappling with the boy's arm. Panic fueled his movements. They had to escape, but Jonah stood frozen in fear. Merc fought valiantly, swinging a makeshift club, striking the nearest assailant, but it barely staggered them. A tide of attackers surged forward, pushing Cade and the others deeper into the fray. The air filled with the cacophony of shouts, clangs, and desperate gasps. Cade shouted, fear threading through his voice, but the words felt weak against the tide of darkness closing in. He fought against the encroaching figures, muscles straining, heart pounding. They couldn't be trapped here. Not like this. Just as Cade turned to locate Jonah, he He saw horror reflected in the boy's eyes as an attacker lunged toward him. The world around Cade narrowed, his instincts kicking in. He roared, pushing past bodies propelled by a mix of rage and desperation. He yelled, shielding Jonah from another blow. He swung wildly to clear a path. Adrenaline surged through him, turning despair into furious energy. But as they struggled to escape, Cade glanced back at Merrick, who was fighting off two attackers. Merrick met Cade's eyes, a silent plea passing between them. "I'm fine." Merrick yelled, but the desperation in his voice told another story. Cade felt a jolt of panic ripple through him. He couldn't leave Merrick. He fought harder, throwing elbows, using every ounce of strength to push back the encroaching figures. They were brothers, bound by the hardships they had faced together. But just then, a cloaked figure grabbed Merrick from behind, yanking him backward. Cade's heart sank. He shouted, fighting to reach him, but the tide of bodies whipped him away. He felt helpless, his chest tightening in fear. He fought against a leaden feeling in his legs, every scream mixing with Merrick's as the darkness clawed at them, dragging them toward despair. Panic overtook Cade's thoughts as he finally reached Merrick, who had staggered back, blood soaking through his shirt. Cade yelled, desperation unleashing a new surge of energy, but Merrick was fading fast, gasping for breath. The fighting swirled around them, chaos growing thicker by the second. "Run!" Merrick shouted, his voice strained. Cade felt his heart shatter at the sight. Every part of him screamed to stay, to hold on, but fear of loss propelled him forward. "No!" Cade shouted, but the attackers closed in. It was a whirlwind of violence, and every instinct inside him screamed to flee to escape this hell. Merrick commanded, the grit in his voice stirring Cade from the brink of despair. With one last fevered look, Cade grabbed Jonah and pushed toward the door, the weight of grief thick in the air around them. They raced through the chaos, pushing past invaders, but the barn reverberated with chaos and loss. Jonah stumbled forward, glancing back as cries of despair rose up. A flash of steel caught Cade's eye, and fear gnawed at him like a relentless predator. Cade urged Jonah, shoving him forward. He could taste the fresh air outside, but the darkness behind them clung to their heels like a shadowy nightmare. Finally, they burst into the open air, hearts pounding as they mounted their horses. But as they rode away, Cade's gaze lingered on the barn, shadows still swirling. The thrill of escape felt tarnished by loss, and as they galloped into the night, the weight of regret followed. The days turned into nights as they journeyed through a desolate landscape, overtaken by haunting memories. Each town they passed felt like a reminder of what they had lost, the emptiness inside digging deeper with every mile. Jonah asked one evening as they sat around a flickering campfire, the flames dancing in the darkness. Cade sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Desperation can make fools of the strongest men. We thought we found hope, but it was just a mirage." Silence settled heavy around them. They both understood that the shadows of their decisions would follow them, an unshakable weight. Cade felt the grip of despair settle around his heart, aching with Merrick's absence. Every sunset felt like a reminder, every glance at Jonah a reminder of things left unsaid, promises broken. They had fought bravely to survive, but the scars of that night lived within them, shaping their journey forward. Eventually, they stumbled upon a valley brooding in twilight. Golden fields stretched before them, promising peace. Cade's heart quickened at the sight, a flicker of hope stirring in the pit of his stomach. Jonah asked, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Safe. Nothing worthwhile ever is. But we can't let fear decide our fate," Cade replied, determination threading through his words. They set up their makeshift shelter as the sun dipped below the horizon, the scars of the past mingling with the promise of new beginnings. That night they sat around the campfire, warmth surrounding them as the flickering flames illuminated their faces. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Cade could breathe. They had fought their demons and come out alive. But as they settled in, a chilling breeze swept through the valley, carrying whispers of the past. Jonah asked quietly, staring into the fire. Cade looked into the glowing embers, the flickering light casting shadows that danced against the darkening sky. "We have to believe it's possible," he said, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "Peace is a choice." But with each passing moment, the shadows around them felt darker, thicker, as if they were being watched. Cade's heart quickened. He He felt an instinctive tension creeping back, pricking at his resolve. Suddenly, the quiet of the night was shattered by the sound of galloping hooves. His heart dropped as several figures emerged from the darkness, their forms cloaked and menacing. Cade shouted, jumping to his feet as the realization set in. They were surrounded again, the shadows closing in. The attackers had tracked them down, and now they would finish what they started. Cade yelled, adrenaline surging through him as panic echoed in both their hearts. All around, the air grew thick with fear and uncertainty. They stood at the edge of the abyss once more, facing the nightmare they had barely escaped. Cade barked as arrows flew through the air, missing them by mere inches. They bolted towards the woods, a desperate rush of survival overwhelming every sense, but the sounds of pursuit echoed behind them. Cade's heart pounded in his chest like a drum, the realization sinking in. They had walked into another trap, and this time victory felt far from reach. With no clear path ahead, they charged into the encroaching shadows, driven by a primal instinct to survive. The screams of their past merged with the cries of the present, a deafening cacophony urging them ever onward into the night, their fate hanging precariously in the balance.